Hi everyone, I'm back this week and I'd like to talk about assemblage, which is a process that artists use when you take found objects and you put them together to make something. So I brought two artists to share with you that do that. Joseph Cornell was an American artist who lived in New York City and did a lot of work in the 1940s and 50s. He died in the 1970s. But what he did was called assemblage. He found all these things he was fascinated by. He went to like thrift stores and bookstores and things and collected images and items that he loved. And he took them home and he didn't know what he was going to do with them. But eventually he started making things with them, putting them together in ways that only he knows why. Like, look at this bird. What's he up to? He's going to pull on that string and maybe that thing is going to spin. I don't know. And there's a little jar. I have no idea what's in there. I'm really curious. It's hard to tell. But he put all these together, made a piece. It's called the Hotel Eden. So he's made this little scene. Maybe it's from a dream, or maybe he just imagined it, or maybe it references something that he remembers from a past time. And here is an episode from The Simpsons. You guys know The Simpsons, right? Look at what's in the top right-hand corner. It's that same piece. In fact, these are all shadow boxes by Cornell in here, or little drawings of them. Kind of cool. This is called A Parrot for Juan Gris. And this piece was based on the painting or the collage in the upper right-hand corner by Juan Gris that Joseph Cornell saw in a gallery and was so inspired by. So it's kind of interesting because he's made these three-dimensional works inspired by this totally flat collage, but you can see some of the influences. You've got the parrot's head, which echoes this foam in the middle of the piece here in the drink, and all the wood grain, different pieces of newspapers. And he did, I don't know, like 15 or so of these assemblages based on this one collage that so caught his eye. And again, you look at this and you wonder, what's going on? Like, well, what is happening in here? What's that little piece of paper in the bottom? That's what I want to know. I'm going to unfold that and see what that says. This one is called Untitled Pharmacy. And somebody said it was medicine for the soul and the imagination. They're little whimsical bottles full of things from nature. There's sand, a butterfly wing, there's shells, all kinds of things in there, and things that just fascinated him. Little collections. It makes you think of Mark Dion if you saw last week's videos. But this happened way before him. This is like a little cabinet of dreams and fancies. And here's a box. It's similar. This makes me think of travel and dreams and memories. Sometimes these were called memory boxes. Maybe this is something that he remembers, that he's reminding himself of. The name means compass in French, so it has something to do with that, and also a poem. It's the name of a poem as well. So, but only he really knows what this is about. But I think it inspires everyone to kind of look and think and dream. And these are all little compass roses, these circles here. So, pretty interesting. Now, this is an artist, Betty Saar, who's from California. She is alive now. And she was a young African-American woman growing up in and around LA. And she saw an exhibit of Joseph Cornell and was inspired by these assemblages. And she makes her own work, but you can see some connections there. And here, hers are much more personal, I think, or more autobiographical. This is about her, the Legends of Black Girl's Window. And you can see a lot of symbols she commonly uses for herself, the sun and the moon and the stars. In the second row of the window panes there, the people symbolize her parents, and the skeleton symbolizes her father, who died when she was young, something that is still very influential to her. And she's included some star signs, the lion for Leo, she's a Leo, and pictures of ancestors, all things that make her who she is. And she talks a lot about racism in her work too. And this head on the mid right hand side is called a phrenology head, and they have words in them or pictures, and they represent the parts of your brain and the things that you're good at. If it's really big, you'd be good at that. If it's small, maybe not so good. And this was a science, or it was a so-called science. It's since been proven to not be correct at all. It has nothing to do with anything that you're good with. But at one point, people really believed in that. And they also used that as a way to prove that African Americans were they thought were not good at certain things. So she uses that a lot to talk about that in her work. In the 70s, she saw an exhibit called The Treasures of Tutankhamun, that's King Tut, and she made an assemblage about that. She is fascinated by other cultures and practices, and she made this box to show some of those pieces and stories about the Egyptian life and symbols. So it was just something that she was fascinated with, much like Joseph Cornell. She collected these things that spoke to her, were interesting to her, and made little boxes about them. This is an interesting piece. It's called Blackbird. And she named it that because that used to be a word that was used in a bad way to describe African Americans. But during the civil rights movement, the word was transformed into a term of endearment, a good term. So it was taken back. So this is called Blackbird, and it's on a vintage chalkboard. And the picture in here is her aunt's third grade class, great aunt, in Missouri in 1911. And what she wanted to tell you about this piece is about how enslaved people were forbidden to read and write, but they were taught in secrecy. And she's included things like alphabet block toys that they didn't have access to, and different symbols. She collects these different African American symbols, these dolls that they used to make that people collected but would not be considered appropriate, would be considered offensive now. And she's added all these in here to tell you this story about education and slavery and her history, her ancestors. So she's used the assemblage to educate you as well as to tell a personal story. She's taken these racist found objects and she's reclaimed them. She's using them and giving them power to tell her story now. I found this video of a studio tour with Betty Saar, and it really explains how she works, and I'd like you to see it.
My greatest pleasure is just to walk around the space and move things and adjust things until a little piece develops. It's sort of like play. I am a maker of objects, assemblage, collage. I will go to a flea market or a thrift store or an antique store and just wait for an inspiration to come from an article that I find. If I see a ship, I know I can use it because that, for me, symbolizes the slave ships. And I use clocks a lot. That's to symbolize time. The blackbird symbolizes segregation, of discrimination, of racial hatred. In the 70s, I used Aunt Jemima figure and made her a warrior, and that was called The Liberation of Aunt Jemima. I just like using an ordinary object and changing the meaning of it. I guess my work could be considered narrative because I feel that every object has its story about its previous life, and sometimes I change that, but I like to have a lot unsaid so the viewer can kind of reinterpret what I'm trying to say. Life seemed to just kind of push me in the direction to being an artist. Because I'm in my 90th year almost, I'm interested in what it's like to be an older artist, how some things don't matter anymore, and it's just the sheer joy of creating things. I'm never out of ideas, and I think that's a good sign.
So we've looked at two artists that use assemblage to create dreamlike settings or tell stories to educate us. A lot of different ways that they use assemblage. And what I'd like you to do is to make your own assemblage. Find a box, a little box, big box, whatever. And think of something, a story you want to tell. You could make a memory box or a dream box and include things that are important to that story in there. I made an example here. So this is my box. So during COVID right now, my family lives in New Jersey, and I have not been able to go there to see them in over a year. And where I grew up, where they live, is right by the boardwalk in the beach. So I've made a little tiny memory box. It lives in a shell that has ephemera and items from the beach, shells, little toys that you win at the boardwalk. I've drawn boardwalk planks on the top, included some photographs of the rides. It's a little hard to see. A token from a place I like to go. Just different things. So this is a memory box for me to remind me of my family and my home and my childhood, but my now too, that I hope to get back to someday. So you can do whatever you want. Now, if you can't find a box, no problem. Get a square piece of paper, fold it this way, fold it this way. Then unfold it and cut up just one fold. So then you have this with these two little sort of legs. Go like this, glue it down. Now you have this little box. It's like a corner of a room. And you can build a scene in here. You can put some photographs, some drawings, magazine cutouts, whatever, little figures, whatever you want. That's your solution if you don't have a box. So I can't wait to see what you make with your assemblages.